It occurs to me a lot that probably half of my brain is full of song lyrics from the 1980s. If you grew up in a certain era, maybe yours is full too, and sometimes I wish I could remove them and fill them with like more useful things. But it is, and I was thinking about a song that came out when I was a kid, and I'm gonna guess that all of you know the song, or at least have heard of it. I had it on, I think, a 45. Remember those? Yeah, I had a record player, all those things, and the 45s were super cool. It wasn't quite the time for tapes yet, and CDs were down the road. But I had the 45, and I don't know why, because the song was everywhere. Everyone was singing it, it was on TV, it was on MTV. The song, of course, was We Are the World. I mean, everybody knows that song, right? It was like in the air in the 1980s. We Are the World, it was Michael Jackson and Lionel Richie, and basically every pop star ever, and country stars too. Willie Nelson has a nice little part in there. You know, any star that you could think of that sang was in this big choir that sang We Are the World. And I remember as a kid, I remember watching it, and like really you would just pick out all these people who I'd heard of, and we had the records too, and it was such a phenomenon. And I remember learning the word famine from We Are the World. Because there was a famine in Ethiopia, which is, of course, why We Are the World happened. And, you know, when you're a kid, you hear all these words and you're not really sure what they mean, but We Are the World taught me the word famine. And I've always associated with We Are the World and kids that were starving, because remember all those images all over the news? That's what We Are the World was all about. Now, of course, there was a backlash where people saying, no, it was just all about the stars' egos, and they just wanted to, you know, look like they were doing good and all of those things. But there were some really cool things that happened because of We Are the World. So I want to just share with you this little snippet in someone else's own words. He says, "I won't ever forget Michael Jackson because his contribution to the song We Are the World had a very significant effect on my life. I am 50 now, but 25 years ago, I was living in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, which at that time was suffering from a long drought and a famine. It was a terrible situation. Lots of people became sick, and many more died. Around 1 million people in all were killed by the famine." Let me say that again. Around 1 million people in all were killed by the famine. In 1984, he continues, Michael Jackson, along with a number of other leading musicians, made the song We Are the World to raise money for Africa. We received a lot of aid from the world, and I was one of those who directly benefited from it. The wheat flour that was distributed to the famine victims was different than the usual cereal we bought at the market. We baked a special bread from it. The local people named the bread after the great artist, and it became known as Michael bread. When you have been through such hard times, you never forget events like this. The bread was soft and delicious, he says. If you speak to anyone who lived in Addis Ababa at that time, they will all know what Michael bread is, and I know I will remember it for the rest of my life. I didn't know that people would remember it so physically, but I have never been through a famine. Probably most of you haven't either. The closest I've come were that's why my ancestors, or some of them, came to this country in the 1800s because of the potato famine in Ireland and Germany, which is why most of my relatives came over. If you've been through a famine, I think it's probably hard to describe, just how awful it is. And you remember things from what I've read, such as Michael bread, right? The song We Are the World got a whole lot of backlash, but did you guys know it's raised over $144 million? It's still raising money right now because people like us in our 40s spend $1 on iTunes and buy it so that we can show our kids, listen to this song. It was really important, and our kids are like, yeah, great. But it's still making money, and it's still affecting hungry people in a good way. That's pretty amazing, right? When I heard that song, I was able to imagine how bad it must have been in Ethiopia. And when you hear someone talking about being in Addis Ababa and how important even a slice of bread was for filling up their bellies, it paints this really kind of terrible picture, but also one where there can be this amazing story of redemption. That's what the story of Ruth is about. We often forget that the first line in the book of Ruth includes the words, "There was a famine in the land." I mean, we skip over that, right? Catherine did a lovely job of reading it, but also, we skip right to the part where Ruth and Naomi are talking, because that's the good stuff. When do you ever hear two women talking to each other in the Bible? Hardly ever, 2 or 3 places. But this first line is what's important about this story. There was a famine in the land. And because there was a famine in the land, it led them to leave where they were. Their husbands died, maybe because of it. They didn't have any children, maybe because of it. There was this famine in the land, and so they had to leave. And this story of Ruth is often, you hear it at weddings, and a few weeks ago, I actually got to hear this story finally at the wedding of 2 women, and I thought, finally, a place where it fits. But this story, if you think about it in the context of a famine in the land, it's not a sweet story. It's a story of desperation. It's a story of 2 women doing whatever it's going to take to feed themselves and to survive. And so when you think about it in terms of survival, in terms of a famine that was like We Are the World, in which thousands and thousands of people died, everyone probably knew someone who died from this famine. You hear the words of Ruth a little differently. And I want to read them one more time and hear them in that context. Ruth said, "Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. There I will be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you." When we hear this story in the context of a famine, it sounds a little different, right? It's the desperation of seeking food for yourself and your family. It's Samaritas Sunday, and so that's what we're talking about, because in Michigan, there are people that come here seeking to feed themselves and their families, and they are every bit as desperate as Ruth and Naomi. We're wearing our different stoles today because these stoles come from Central America. There's a famine right now in Venezuela. There's a famine in South Sudan. There's a famine in Somalia. And it's no coincidence that many people coming here are from those countries where there was a famine in the land, just like the book of Ruth. One of the reasons why I love Samaritas is because I called them and I said, we're going to have Samaritas Sunday. What can we do? I feel desperate sometimes, don't you, about how can we possibly help? The needs are too great. We're not rock stars. We can't record another We Are, maybe we can. I don't know, guys. It's a thought. But they said there's two things that you can do right now to help unaccompanied kids that are coming from countries where there are famines in the land, just like Ruth. And the one thing is, if you have room in your house, they're looking for homes, foster homes for kids, usually teenagers, for a month to 45 days because they want to reunite kids with their family. That's always their goal, is family reunification. The other thing, and I was thinking about this last night and today, one of the first things we did when we got to Michigan, what do you think it was? Buy a coat, yes, thank you, Eric. With winter, if I had candy, I would throw it to you, but I don't. I'll have to remember that. Yeah, buy a coat, right? We came up here from Georgia, and we bought our coats on clearance in August. Highly recommend, the warmest coats we could possibly find. These kids are coming from countries where they have no concept of Michigan weather. They all need winter coats. And so Samaritas is asking for $50 to buy these kids a winter coat, to buy them a suitcase, because most of them come either with nothing or with a garbage bag, if they come with anything. Things that we think of as absolute necessities: a warm winter coat, a suitcase to live in Michigan to start their new life. That gives me a little bit of hope that there's something we can do. But there's more than that. Because the hospitality and generosity that we have as people of faith from God, the riches that we have, we can go above and beyond that kind of small hospitality. We can share God's love with people who have been through a famine in this day and age. If you heard We Are the World and you thought, what can I do? Or you hear the story of Ruth and Naomi and you think, what can I do in the face of all that pain? Here are two small things. And sometimes that can make a huge difference. We're reflecting the hospitality shown to us by God back to children in need. And that is a beautiful thing, to bring the reign of God here on earth. Amen.